All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Young Farmers Coalition's 2020 Annual Leadership Convergence. Hope you're all enjoying this very fine Monday. Before we get started, I just want to thank Escabona for the support of this Convergence keynote. I have the almost unnecessary task of introducing on behalf of the National Young Farmers Coalition our 2020 Convergence keynote speaker. Unnecessary because in a virtual room of young farmers and land stewards, Leah Penniman requires no introduction. We know Leah as a farmer, storyteller, teacher, mentor, author of the book Farming While Black, and founder of Soulfire Farm. We recognize Leah as a leading voice in our shared effort to decolonize and re-indigenize our relationship to land and to sustenance. We recognize Leah as a healer showing us how to repair our relationship with the earth. So instead of an introduction, just an offering of gratitude. And the National Young Farmers Coalition would like to thank Soulfire Farm and Leah for all the support they give to our organization and their leadership in this work of remaking our food system. We thank Leah for being a voice of common sense of those who work in relationship with land toward our liberation. And I ask you to join me in giving gratitude to Leah for sharing her voice with us this evening. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you so much for that sincere and heartfelt welcome. This feels less like a keynote at some big anonymous convention and more like a homecoming to family. I feel most at home and at ease and most myself in the presence of farmers, earth keepers, and land stewards. So the thanks is all way. Like, it really is an honor to be here and a blessing to be here. And I thank you for taking time when we're so zoomed out, right? And we love the soil so much to be together in this space. Thank you from my heart. And today we're going to talk about the sacred and important work of uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system. And like always, if y'all have rocked with us at Soulfire, if you've rocked with the Black community at all, if you're part of the Black community, you know that we don't do anything without acknowledging and paying homage to our ancestors. And my grandmother has really been in my heart in blessed memory. She passed away in my late teens, Brownlee McCullough, daughter of sharecroppers in Rock Hill, South Carolina. She is the person, she's the baby in the picture here. And her grandmother, who was enslaved on that same land in South Carolina, is in the picture to the right, Susie Boyd, or Mary Jane Boyd rather. And she's the one who helped me find my love of growing things. You know, she grew up on a farm, and then when her family followed the trail of the Great Migration to the urban north, she held on to her strawberry patch and her crabapple tree. And when I went to go visit her, I got to tend those fruits and make jam. And that was my first experience pulling joy from the earth. So shout out to my grandma. And I welcome you to think of an ancestor who helped you be connected to land, be connected to food, and to write their name in the chat. So call in those ancestors in reverence in the chat. Who is it who paved the way for you to care about land? And as those fly in, keep them coming. We also, I know you already, I'm sure, did a land acknowledgement earlier today, but it is incumbent upon me to give thanks and pledge my solidarity to the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation, upon whose land I farm. Very, very grateful for their forgiving friendship with us as involuntary settlers on the land. Most of the Mohican Nation is now in a small reservation in Bowler, Wisconsin, and we've been sharing seeds, paying voluntary taxation, created the first cultural respect easement in New York State to share land with the Mohican Nation, and just hope to continue to deepen that relationship of solidarity. And I welcome you also to write in the chat whose land you're on. You know, I acknowledge that many of you are First Peoples, First Nations folks of Turtle Island, and that you are on your own land, but many of us are not, whether we are voluntary or involuntary settlers. I think we owe a debt of gratitude and a humble pledge of solidarity to the First Nations people. So please write that in the chat as well. And the last shout out I want to give before kind of delving into our storytelling is, of course, my team. I could not be here. There's no revolution of one. So I couldn't be here talking to you all. Like Soul Fire Farm would not exist. The Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust would not exist if it wasn't for all the hands that throw down, Larissa, Kiani, Justin, Naima, and all of your teams and your families. Somebody's nursing a baby right now so that you can be on this call, right? Someone is feeding some chickens right now so you can be on this call. So shout out to the teams. I want to spend a little time thinking about what is the legacy that we have an opportunity to carry forward in terms of equity in the food system. Those of us who are Black, who are Afrodescendiente, right? Our ancestors had the audacity to braid seeds into their hair before being forced onto transatlantic slave ships. And it wasn't just the physical seed, right? We know that they brought Black rice with them, and melon and eggplant, sesame and cotton. They brought these seeds tucked away in their tresses, like hidden in their locks. But with that seed, they also brought a whole lot of really badass, amazing knowledge in terms of how do we be in right relationship with the earth and right relationship with community. And you all know this by now, I hope, but so many of the technologies that we as sustainable farmers consider as European or ahistorical actually come from Black and Indigenous people. Everything from soil testing using texture by feel to composting with worms, composting with ash and bone char, making terraces, polycultures, and pretty much everything that's now considered permaculture, that's an indigenous technology. Many of the tools we use, like sprinklers and the hoe and irrigation itself, rotational grazing, food preservation, raised beds, work parties, credit unions, land sharing co-ops, like these are our technologies. And one of the tragedies of the food system and why we even have to talk about uprooting racism and ceding sovereignty is that, when our folks got here, were forced here onto this land, we found that the colonizers had created a food system that was not based in any way on the lessons of the seeds in our hair. Whether you looked at the way the land was used, labor, the ecology itself, capital, food, all of these aspects of the food system fundamentally were rooted in oppression and exploitation and continue to be so. So without getting into the whole history, because this is the shorter version of the keynote, let's look at land, for example, right? Right now in the United States, between 95 and 98% of all of the farmland in this country, right, is white owned. Almost all of the farmland in this country is white owned. And that's not because we don't want to farm or we don't know how to manage our businesses, right? It's because there's a whole history, a whole legacy of land theft. We're talking about 1.5 billion acres of land wrested away from Native people in a genocidal onslaught. We're talking about almost 16 million acres of land stolen from Black farmers by the federal government, the USDA discriminating systemically against Black farmers in terms of its credit programs and crop allotments and crop assistance. White supremacist groups like the White Citizens Council, the White Caps, and the Ku Klux Klan, literally lynching Black farmers for the audacity to leave the plantation and driving them off their land as a push factor in the Great Migration. We're talking about retirement companies like TIAA and other investment firms buying up vulnerable lands where a person hasn't left a will and it's an heir property, and then using those as investments. And all of this, right, all of this theft of land sort of colludes to where we are today, where we have a more racially skewed land distribution than ever before in our history. And Malcolm X, knew what he was talking about when he said that land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. Ralph Page knew what he was talking about when he said that land is the only real wealth in this country, and if we don't own any, we're out of the picture. Land is the basis of our sustenance, and so there's not a lot we can do without access to land. Looking at labor in this country, and why I say that labor in the food system is really rooted in exploitation and oppression. In the nation today, around 85% of farm workers are people of color, mostly Hispanic, Latinx, people de Mexico and the Caribbean. And yet only about 2% of farms are managed by Latinx and Hispanic community, which makes farming, being a farm manager, one of the whitest professions. It swaps with being a veterinarian for the #1 slot on alternating years. And actually being a laborer in the food system is among the brownest professions, meaning that folks of color predominate. And this has historically been the case. Again, we didn't just wake up today with the food system we have. It was constructed over time. And we know that the OG labor in our food system was, of course, enslaved Africans who built a multi-trillion-dollar economy, agricultural economy. And then it was Chinese and other Asian workers until the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then with the Bracero program, Mexican workers, now H-2A, as well as undocumented people who don't even have really the privilege of an H-2A visa. And this has been laid bare in COVID. You all already know this, but in COVID, when you see over 700 outbreaks of the novel coronavirus in meat packing and food processing plants, when you see over 300,000 farm workers diagnosed with COVID, it really shows the world in a way that maybe previously was obscured just how vulnerable these essential workers are. And I would argue that the United States might see the work as essential, but actually not the worker as essential. And this is codified in US law, right? So in 1938, when FDR was pushing for the New Deal. So we're talking about labor laws for the first time, like the right to a day off in 7, the right to an 8-hour workday, the right to collective bargain, child labor protections, and so forth. Farm workers were excluded from that in a deal with the Southern Democrats who didn't want, quote, Negroes to benefit from the law. And we have not updated these provisions. And so farm workers still don't have the right to unionize, still don't have the right to a day off, to overtime pay, et cetera. And that's something that is really disgusting that we're in 2020, and this is how we're treating the people who are arguably most essential. Looking at capital, our racial wealth inequality is devastatingly rampant. Depending on whether you look at indicators of individual wealth or household wealth, we're talking about at least a 16-to-1 wealth gap, which means that a white baby, when they take their first breath in the United States, is automatically, on average, 16 times wealthier than a Black baby. And I am pretty sure they're not doing financial literacy and investment banking in the womb, which leads to one conclusion, which is that wealth is inherited. And you can trace the wealth back to slavery, back to sharecropping and worker exploitation. You can trace that wealth to redlining and the exclusion of Black and brown folks from home ownership, to the Homestead Act, which gave native land to white people, but not to Black people, and all kinds of white affirmative action over time, both related to the food system and outside of the food system. That's resulted in the fact that, like most of us folks of color, like we don't have a whole bunch of money to just go buy land and a tractor and get started as farmers. Maybe not even enough to make sure that our children have healthy foods to eat, because there isn't that padding in the bank or that trust fund or that property that we know we're going to inherit. So this gap in capital is really crucial to understand when we talk about justice in the food system. Moving in that arc to food, this beautiful child is among her peers in that 1 in 3 Black children in this country rely on the emergency food system and SNAP benefits to meet their basic caloric needs. Communities of color are more likely to struggle with diabetes, heart disease, kidney failure, and other diet-related illness. Not because we don't know how to eat, not because we need someone to teach us how to make kale salad, right? Or knife skills or something like that, but fundamentally because there is not access in many of our communities. Your zip code right now is a leading determiner of your life expectancy, not to mention the incarceration rates in your community, the quality of education in your community, and that's all traceable to redlining. So we have to really look at this situation as a food apartheid situation, not a food desert. It's not a natural phenomena that Black and brown folks don't have supermarkets, farmers markets, affordable food in our neighborhoods, and the wealth to attain and acquire that food. It really is a human created system of segregation. And then, lastly in this arc, the ecology. I don't think it's an accident that the way we treat human beings in the food system is going to be echoed and amplified in the way we treat the Earth Mother herself. Industrial farming is the leading driver of climate change, of water withdrawals, of biodiversity loss, of land convergence, of water pollution. It is a major, major factor. The way that we attain our food is a major factor in terms of our survival as a species on this planet. And it's not that we don't know how to grow food in a way that's in harmony with the earth. You know, we can go back to those beautiful seeds that our ancestors brought in their hair and that knowledge. And we know that between 50 and 70% of the calories produced on the earth are still produced in these smallholder ways, in these regenerative, sustainable ways. But that knowledge is usually, it's either appropriated, it's sort of trivialized and hobbified, right, as a hobby, or it's ignored altogether in the name of racial capitalism. So, as I mentioned, you know, I think COVID is not, it's not that these problems are new in a time of pandemic, but I think that these pre-existing challenges of the industrial food system really not serving the nutritional needs, the caloric needs of our communities, right? The problems of industrial ag causing climate chaos and the resulting natural disasters, you know, farm worker exploitation, these things are exacerbated. And my prayer in this time, as multiple pandemics attempt to choke out our breath, right? Our breath from the smoke and the wildfires, our breath with the knees of police on our necks, you know, our breath with COVID phlegm in our lungs, as these pandemics attack. My prayer is that people who were previously insulated from these challenges, who never saw the cracks in the system, but now are laid bare, you know, are suddenly seeing, oh, maybe capitalism doesn't love me because I lost my job, or, you know, I can't get groceries, or there's smoke in the air. Not praying for people suffering, but praying that there's an awakening, that we can be believed, maybe for the first time by white America, that these systems are not working. And now that they're not working for most people, including white America, there's an opportunity for change. So I'm going to spend most of my time actually talking about what Soulfire Farm and what other Black and Brown led farming organizations are doing about all of this to uproot racism and seed sovereignty in the food system. But I want to give you a chance to reflect for a moment about your own relationship to land and food, sort of bring it from the macro to the micro. What needs healing for you in terms of your relationship to land and food? So I'll be quiet for like 3 deep breaths while you write in the chat your response to that question. All right, so go ahead and write your responses. What aspect of your relationship to land and food needs healing? And while you all are throwing up those thoughts, and please take time to read for one another's ideas, respond to one another, connect, you know, as much as we can over a Zoom webinar. We want to be building community and building solidarity. But I want to talk now about this concept of rememberers, this idea that, you know, in every generation, there's at least a handful of folks who remember the legacy of these sacred seeds that were braided into our ancestors' hair and work hard, fight hard to make sure those seeds are not forgotten. And, you know, we at Soulfire Farm asked ourselves a question, you know, what would it be like to create a farm and a farming organization that was entirely predicated on carrying on these seeds and carrying on this idea from one of our sacred rememberers, Mama Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, when you have 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to say or do. She was truly a rememberer. What if we took that idea that to get free, we really need to feed ourselves, and built an organization on that premise? So we started looking at, like, who are these rememberers? What did they do? What did they teach? And how can we build upon that? So I'm sure y'all recognize these folks. On the left, there's Dr. George Washington Carver of Tuskegee University. I just finished reading this really beautiful little tiny memoir called The Man Who Talks to Flowers. about Dr. Carver. A lot of folks know him for the peanut and know him maybe now for regenerative agriculture. He's one of the founders of the modern organic movement. He spent a bunch of time in the South in the late 1800s, 2 generations before Rodale, teaching farmers how to do regenerative ag through cover cropping, rotational grazing, silvopasture in the oak forest, and more. But a lot of folks don't know that he was a deeply spiritual man and actually took his instructions directly from God through nature. So he would get up early in the morning before dawn, go out into the forest and listen to the trees and see what to do. And he credits all of his patents, of which he has thousands, as direct instructions from nature about what they wanted to become. Really, really powerful teacher. Also out of Tuskegee University, Booker T. Whatley, one of the founders of the farm to table movement. So all these amazing direct marketing strategies we use, like the CSA, community supported agriculture, the pick your own, the newsletters and memberships to our farm, that came out of Whatley's work. And so we decided to build a farm based on this legacy of regenerative ag, and to really implement these technologies. And so thinking about what does it look like to have low and no till, semi-permanent raised beds, cover cropping, heavy mulches, perennial polycultures, use of legumes. What does it look like to really take care of the soil as if it were a relative? And something that's been so exciting is the only land we could afford when we were looking for a farm back in 2006 was this pretty marginal mountainside territory. And you can see in my left hand, I mean, that is the soil. The subsoil was the topsoil. It was so badly eroded. It was heavily logged. And people said, there's no way you can farm there. But after a decade of really investing in this regenerative approach of calling the carbon back into the soil, as my colleague Larissa would say, that's the soil in our right hand, right? That rich, dark, humus, sweet smelling, wonderful, friable soil is what we get to cultivate in now. And the same ethos that we apply to the land, of course, we apply to our buildings. There was no human habitat on the land when we arrived. We had to build everything from scratch, even the septic, the well, the electric, the driveway, everything from scratch. And we decided to build our buildings out of straw bale and cob and timber frame from locally sustainably harvested pine, to build sacred geometry into our structures and beauty, because our communities, our Black and brown communities, have been given the message, like, you ain't worth shit. Like, you get to live in a shack. Like, you get to just be in these crumbling, rat infested, lead paint chipping buildings. Like, that's for you. And to take the time, to take the years and the labor and the sweat, let me tell you, the calluses, the blood that it takes to build a beautiful, sustainable building for our Black and brown folks to come learn is really sacred and really important. And we have solar power, biomass. We cluster the buildings together to leave most of our 80 acres of habitat for the wildlife. And so we continued our investigation, right? We said, okay, so in addition to this ecological ethos that we inherit from Tuskegee, what about the Black Panthers, right? These are other rememberers. The Black Panther Party had a survival program where they brought groceries to elders. They drove people to visit incarcerated loved ones. They fed 20,000 children breakfast every single day. And this ethos of community care is really central. And so we said, how do we build on that? And out of it, we created our Solidarity Share program, which is a doorstep delivery, low and no cost, healthy food distribution to families who are surviving food apartheid. And so we're providing, the vegetables, eggs, pasture-raised meat, herbal medicine, and value-add products. And so that gets boxed up every week, brought in this like kind of creepy, kind of cute van with a cute teenager helping with the deliveries, to make sure that folks' wealth, folks' color, folks' zip code is not a barrier to accessing this nourishing, life-giving food. So like marching through history, we're investigating who are these rememberers. And back to Tuskegee, one of the very, very important aspects of remembering comes from the work of Thomas Campbell and his colleagues at Tuskegee, who realized they could not keep knowledge to themselves, right? In the Black community, we have an each one, teach one ethos. And so we are trying to make sure that whatever we know is getting out to the community. So at first with just a mule and a cart and nothing more than that, Thomas Campbell and other teachers at Tuskegee would go out into the rural counties and find the most like busted, dilapidated farm. And they would nurse those animals back to health. They would prune the trees, they would plant cover crops, build terraces, and then open up that farm as a demonstration site for the entire county to come learn regenerative ag in the, in the spirit of like extreme farm makeover. They later upgraded to this truck, but that principle remained the same of making sure that we are sharing knowledge with community. So at Soulfire, we wanted to build on that, right? And we had people calling us from just months into opening as a farm and being like, is it true that there's like Black folks farming in the woods and you're okay? And can we come and learn? And so we started creating training programs really outside the system. A lot of our folks don't find land grant universities accessible. They can't woof for cultural reasons, for financial reasons. So coming to a paid apprenticeship at Soulfire Farm, or a week-long training course, or a day-long program, or one of our online programs became this entry point into being able to farm. And we also just offer, we now offer this special certificate program in hanging onions to cure wild looking fly. So you should definitely sign up for that at soulfirefarm.org, as well as our other programs. And for us, it's important that we uplift not only what we call like livelihood farmers. So livelihood farmers being those folks who are, like many of you, trying to make a living from farming, which is so dope and so important. And I acknowledge we're up against a lot in a capitalist system that undervalues like farmers, but also subsistence farmers, right? Our communities around the world and here in the US from the beginning with provision gardens have a tradition of growing in gardens to take care of a significant portion of our nutritional needs. And so with our Soulfire in the City program, we work with just under 50 families setting up their gardens, helping them with their seeds and soil and plants and mentorship and lead control to make sure that folks can grow their own food. And this was huge in the pandemic because so many people couldn't get to the grocery store, or the grocery stores were empty. And so this was an opportunity, right, for folks to advance their food sovereignty. And we do this, each one teach one, intercambio work internationally as well. We have sister farms in Haiti, in Ghana, in Mexico, in Vieques. And with these sibling farms, we are going and learning from and teaching and sharing resources. So some of the examples of work we've done in Haiti is a 2,000 tree mango forest, installing an irrigation pump so farmers can replant after the hurricanes really devastated their first crop, installing solar technology and compost systems, and more. So continuing our investigation of who are these rememberers, right? I already mentioned Mama Fannie Lou Hamer, who didn't just talk about greens and gumbo soup being canned for the winter. She actually started Freedom Farm because what was happening in the 1960s and prior is that Black folks who wanted to exercise their basic civil right of registering to vote and voting, which we, if we're not awake to it by now, how important that is, like hopefully this moment awakens us. They would be kicked off the plantation where they were sharecropping. So they'd lose their home and their job in one swoop for being seen at the county trying to register to vote. So Freedom Farm was actually created as a home for these voters. So these farmers got together and they had a co-op, 70 families co-owned, right? Similar impetus and similar time. New Communities, Inc. was the first ever land trust. It was a Black-owned land trust in the community that took in these sharecroppers who had lost their homes. And so powerful in this time to see institution building, to see educational institution building happening. And one of the ways that we are working to try to replicate that is to build our own institutions, our Black and Brown-led institutions. And so we were one of the founding farmers of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, which is a baby, wonderful organization, just a couple of years old. but it brings together farmers who are also dispossessed of land for different reasons, right? But into an organization, into a land trust where we can receive donations of land in the spirit of rematriation and reparations and make sure they're permanently protected in the Black and Brown community and used for earth keeping, used for agriculture. So this is a super powerful, dope project that builds on the legacy of New Communities, Inc. And land trusts, which were created, that institutional structure was created by Black farmers as a way to save our land and save our lives. Also in our amazing alumni networks, we are supporting our alums in creating institutions as well, which become this beautiful bedrock for organizing and for food sovereignty. So orgs like the Caratumbo Farming Cooperative, which is an immigrant-owned, queer, women and trans-owned Chicago-based co-op that was fabulous in their COVID response. I mean, getting food to the doorsteps of elders and who speak Spanish and indigenous languages who were like totally left out. A lot of the relief work, you know, that's a powerful institution. Love Fed New Haven is a powerful institution that's building home gardens for people living under food apartheid. People y Alimentos, working in New York City with farmers and gardeners to make sure that a lot of this knowledge that we're sharing is accessible in Espanol. Miracle on Craig Street, right? High Hog Farm, which is taking back, High Hog Farm is amazing. They are like taking back the fibers for the Black community because we're all cotton traumatized, right? And have been almost like completely left out of the fiber world. So it is really beautiful to see Keisha Cameron promoting fiber amongst Black farmers in the community, percussion farms in the Northwest and more. And so this institution building is part of our remembering. And one of the ways we make that possible in light of the dangerous and gross 16-to-1 wealth gap is reparations. And that might sound like a scary word to some folks, but you know, as my mentor Ed Whitfield said, imagine if your neighbor stole your cow in broad daylight, everyone saw them do it, and then a week later they're coming to you with tears in their eyes and remorse in their hearts, being like, I'm so sorry I took your cow, really, really sorry, but I'm gonna make it up to you. You know, every week for the rest of this cow's life, I am going to give you half a pound of butter. I don't know about y'all, but I would be like, actually, my cow, please, not the butter. But we're in a very unfortunate situation in this country where we're trying to deal with deep racial inequity with little bits of butter here and there, but we need to actually give the land back. We need to give the wealth back. And we are not letting the government off the hook for wholesale reparations, but in the meantime, people can make gifts in a spirit of reparations to one another. So this reparations map, which you can find on our website, you can find on the NEFOC website, has projects, ever-growing list of projects that are Black and Brown led that need something and that can be supported. So again, building on the legacy of these rememberers, we have to also think about the organizers, right? We need to think about those Black farmers during the civil rights movement who provided like shelter, food, shoe fixing services, meeting space, armed protection, who even leveraged their land as collateral to bail people out of jail. During the civil rights movement, like those Black farmer organizers, we got to think about their legacy. We got to think about the legacy of Via Campesina all around the world. This peasant movement that's been on the front lines against Monsanto, against GMO, against international agribusiness. We got to think about the farm worker organizing, right? Larry Idleong, Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, the Immokalee workers, right? All of these powerful remembers also inform our work. And so zooming out a little bit, you know, at Soulfire Farm, we can't just be an island. We can't just be an institution on our own. We also need to be thinking about how are we organizing? How are we networking? So big shout out to the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, really powerful national coalition, horizontal decision-making, Black leadership. And we have been able, it will be announced soon, I can't say too much, but with National Black Food and Justice Alliance and other partners, we've been able to actually change the legislation that's up for conversation about what's happening with the USDA, who owns the lands, and who gets paid to learn to farm. So very, very exciting to see this grassroots organizing. We contributed to the Green New Deal. We contributed to the Breathe Act, right? We contribute to the Heal Food Alliance platform and more. And then the final thing when we talk about rememberers is to know that like our fam back on the continent, they didn't forget either, right? There are rememberers to today who haven't forgotten, even in the face of colonization, in the face of the pressure of the World Bank, of the IMF to like sell out their people, right? Who have not forgotten who they really are. And I wanna give a shout out to the rememberers who are the Queen Mothers in Manya Krobo and Somanya, Ghana, Eastern region, West Africa. These are my teachers. These are the women who got me started on this journey of spiritual activism. When I was in my early 20s, I've gone back many times to go and visit them, and thank goodness I was. So what I want to say about the Queen Mothers is that they're freaking brilliant, and they really challenge us, right? They ask us, like, is it true that in the United States that we're going to put a seed in the ground and we're not going to pray, we're not going to dance, we're not going to pour libations, we're not going to like even say thank you to the earth, right? And then we're going to expect the seed to grow. They say that's why you're all sick, right? That's why you're all sick. You're all sick because you treat the earth like a commodity and not like a relative. So part of remembering is not just remembering like raised beds and cover crops and CSAs and work parties, right? Part of remembering is also remembering like who the earth actually is and who we are in relationship to the earth. Like we must, I really believe, like we must have a spiritual ecology. We must have a practice of ecological humility. We must have the wisdom of our relationship to earth. And this isn't just like self-sacrificing. It really is self-serving. I mean, I think of DeJour Carter, right? When he came out to the farm as a teenager for one of our youth programs, and he's talking about like, I'm not getting out of the van. I'm scared of a bear. Like, I'm just not about this at all. And because he didn't want to be left alone, eventually like was coaxed out of the van, and we started to take a walk around the farm. And this child doesn't want to get his sneakers dirty, so he goes barefoot. And no one listened on the whole tour. I mean, they were squealing because there's like frogs and salamanders going across their feet and a snake over here and that's fine. But when we did a debrief, you know, DeJour is like, I know this sounds crazy, but as soon as my foot touched the ground, like my grandmother's memory came up through my foot into my heart. And she died when I was young, but I'm remembering now that when I was little, she would garden with me and she put a worm in my hands and told me to be gentle. And I didn't think I had anything to do with this place, right? I didn't think I had anything to do with this land or with farming, but I'm remembering that I do have everything to do with this place, right? And the earth gives us that. The earth gives us that connection to our ancestors, that connection to the sacred, that connection to what's possible, that there's a bigger story than like the task list and the day-to-day and the accumulation, that we're part of a beautiful cosmic dance. And the earth gives us to that, but only if we are willing to listen, to honor, to revere, right? And I do believe that our freedom is really integrally connected to the liberation of the lands and our liberation on the land, that all of that is part of one story. So I want to talk to you a little bit about solutions, you know, because Soul Fire Farm and our networks, we have a unique position, right, as like a Black, Indigenous, people of color-led farm connected to these networks in the region we're in. So the solutions and the practice that we do is really homegrown, and it's not necessarily the same for everybody. So I just want to mention that there's a whole bunch of solidarity strategies for how we can all engage together in uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system, right? And this is just a short list. I'll throw up a link in a little bit that has a more complete list, because there's a lot of right answers. But I know, at least for me with my A-type like left brain, I'm like, give me a list, like what do I do? So some of the solidarity strategies include giving the land back. That is what it sounds like. It's not like letting Black people like farm your front yard to feel better about yourself, like actually giving the land back to Indigenous people, reparations for Black people in the form of land and money, legislative advocacy, you know, HR 40 for reparations, the Fairness for Farm Workers, the Urban Agriculture Act, fixing the Farm Bill, so there's more money for 2501, things like that. Language justice, that means making sure that folks' language that they speak is not a barrier to accessing your programs and services. So interpretation, Spanish first, French first, Indigenous languages first programs. Y'all, most of us have bank accounts. Some of us even have, you know, for our organization, we might have, you know, like stocks and bonds or some of that. I don't even have that, but you know what I'm saying. So look at what it's invested in. Look at what you're voting for with those dollars, and make sure we're investing in our community loan funds. We're investing in the Black Farmer Fund rather than these exploitative corporations. Buying from Black producers, and we got a list of them on our website. Creating good jobs for people and hiring outside of your comfort zone to make sure those opportunities are available. Sharing the harvest with a sliding scale. A big one, so a lot of folks who are part of, especially nonprofit organizations, you may not realize like how much that organizational infrastructure is a resource, right? Because when you're starting up a new co-op or new nonprofit, new organization, like all of those forms and paperwork, the legal compliance, the taxes, the accountants and bookkeeping and web design, like all that stuff is huge. It takes so much work. And so an established organization providing that for a BIPOC organization at no or low cost is really huge. You know, showing up for the actions, donating money to BIPOC orgs, passing the mic, giving up your list of donors, studying racism, right? These are all examples of solidarity strategies. And I mean, I imagine with this crowd, y'all know you aren't going to tell me like, oh, but there aren't any Black or brown people who are like in farming to support. You're not going to say that, but just in case, I just want to point out that it's not just historically that we have rememberers, right? We have rememberers all around us, including on this call, right? Just a few of them are like D-Town Farm, Rise and Root Farm, Grow Where You Are, the Corbin Hill Food Project, the Black Dirt Farm Collective, Land Loss Prevention Project, National Black Food and Justice Alliance, SAFON, CASA, Fresh Future Farm, Bugs, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, Black Farmer Fund, Black Church Food Security Network, Heal Food Alliance, on and on and on, right? So I actually want to ask you right now to throw in the chat the names of organizations, formations, collectives that are led by Black, Indigenous, and or people of color working on land and food. So throw those in the chat as resources, because I think it's really important that we crowdsource and we understand, you know, just who's doing the work in our communities, right? Because sometimes we get confused around race. Like if I were to ask y'all, I'm interested in working on veterans issues like PTSD and access to healthcare. Who are the experts in my community whose lead I should follow? You would be like, obviously, veterans, right? If I want to work on Islamophobia in the community and I want to know who the experts, right? Y'all are going to say, obviously, the Muslim community is the experts. But somehow with race, we get confused. And people are like, I can't imagine how to find out what to do about racism in the food system. Well, the experts are the people who have experienced racial injustice in the food system. So that's Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, Native American, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian communities, right? Who've experienced that are the experts. And so we need to make sure that whatever solutions we're devising center the leadership of impacted folks. You can always ask yourself, it's just a temperature check with whatever you're planning to do to fix the food system. Does this transfer power to producers of color? Does this transfer resources to producers of color? Does this transfer dignity, agency, and sovereignty to producers of color? If you get a 3-check yes, power, resources, dignity, then you know you're probably on the right track in terms of your solution. Because fundamentally, right, what is like the whole meaning of life? I would say it's got something to do with every single one of us getting to be fully alive during our short and precious time on this planet. So you can check out more action steps on our website on soulfirefarm.org. There's like a whole bunch of stuff. There's a much longer list of BIPOC-led orgs. I'm going to see if I can get this chat and like add yours in as well. But I'm going to give you a little preview of what's to come, and then I'm going to close out with a quote. So when I'm done speaking, we have a Q&A period here, and then we'll give you some more details. But there also is for some of you who are registered in a certain way to be part of this breakout discussion session. So just like stay tuned for that. It's going to be really fun too. But I do want to end with one of my favorite poems by Pablo Neruda, which says, perdón si cuando quiero contar mi vida es tierra lo que cuento. Esta es la tierra. Crece en tu sangre y creces. Si se apaga en tu sangre, tú te apagas. Pardon me if when I want to tell the story of my life, it is the land I talk about. This is the land. It grows in your blood and you grow. If it dies in your blood, you die out. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Leah. We are getting more responses in the chat than I could possibly handle to that very last question that you asked. So keep that coming. I just want to let everyone know before we get started with the Q&A that if you're using the chat function for the Q&A, there's so many things coming in that it's a little difficult for me to keep up. So if you put something in the chat box that is actually a question for Leah, please add that to the Q&A function at the bottom. And as we talk, please feel free to continue adding. We do have a couple, Leah, ready for you. The first is, can you explain the difference between dispossessed, and displacement?
Well, I'm more of like a muddy boots person than like an academic definition semantics person, but I would say my understanding is displacement is you are moved from one place to another. Presumably you still holding on to something. Dispossessed, you lost it. They took it from you. They took it away. And with not clarity that you are now in a different situation. So that's what I would say about that.
Thank you, Leah. The next is, how can a farm be involved in the international program with Soulfire? I have a friend in the Dominican Republic who wants to use her family's land for farming.
Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations to your friends. It always like warms my heart so much when folks are deciding to hold on to family lands and make it work. I will say if your friend wants to reach out, we do have some international projects on the reparations map. And so that might be a way to get some resources. And because there seems to be a lot of interest for BIPOC farmers in the United States to have an international sibling farm, down the road, we hope to be able to do some matchmaking so that there can be that intercambio, that exchange of like resources and ideas and solidarity. My belief is that the folks who are closest to the land, who are the peasant farmers of the world, are the ones who have the solutions about how we're going to survive as a species. So we need to be talking to each other, and we need to be talking to each other across borders. So yeah, just have your friend reach out, and once we get that program up and running, we can try to match them up with somebody.
All right, the next one's an easy one. Can you talk more about your dreaming process and how you and those who are continuously building your dream worked collaboratively and spiritually to materialize your vision? I.e. any spell work or magic work you did to create this vision, and am wondering how you incorporate this, especially into policy and organizing work.
Ooh,
I know.
This is beautiful. So I'm going to answer this question, but I will say that I don't want to also diminutize like just the bust-ass, hard-ass work in the physical realm. So there's the dreaming, and then there's the like moment when I'm in a hole with a shovel with a foundation I've been digging for months with my partner because we can't afford an excavator. And we realized that we dug the hole like 10 degrees off of solar self because we were using our compass, and magnetic and solar self aren't the same. Go figure, pay attention to earth science. And we're like literally bloody with our hands, like callus popped. Like, do you want to quit? Like, no. Do you want to quit? No. And like, it's been like that the whole time. So I will say that the ancestors back us up when we're willing to work. But as far as dream work, I mean, this might sound mad cheesy, and I don't believe I'm saying this to so many people, but the earth and my ancestors gave me this instruction when I was a really young child. My sister and I thought we had invented a religion of nature worship. We would go out into the woods and, you know, build our temples and sing our songs of praise to the earth and receive our instructions. We did a bunch of organizing as young as 5 years old in defense of Mother Earth. And that was all like channeled. And it wasn't until I was a young adult and traveled to West Africa that I realized that we were remembering our ancestral religion and not inventing it. So there is nothing we do that is not instructed. I do dream work. So I'm a queen mother in Vodun. I also am an initiated devotee of Ifa and Oya in the Yoruba tradition, training and studying very hard. And so divination is a big part of what we do. That's how we make decisions. We ask the earth permission. I do a dream ceremony called illumination, which involves a tea and then having dreams and then using a divination tool to confirm that they're correct. So pretty much at every turn, including, you know, like human beings will obviously give us ideas for new programs and things, and we take that accountability very seriously. But before we do anything, we like confirm with the spirit world that it's going to work and that they have our backs. And so I think that's part of the reason that like streams flow and doors open, is that the spirit world is like, do this thing, right?
Thank you. The next one that I'm seeing is, if I own land and want to put it into a trust for BIPOC farmers, are there good resources for that?
Yes, there are. This is such an exciting development because, I mean, how beautiful is it, right? That there are folks who've inherited land or own land for in whatever way who are realizing that sharing is a good thing to do. And I'm so grateful for that. Like, it's amazing. But, you know, to answer your question, the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust has an intake form essentially about land offerings. So if you are in New England or upstate New York, that would be the go-to. And I know that there are replication projects of NEFOC, you know, around the country, and probably the national like one-stop shop to find out about that would be Agrarian Trust, of which NEFOC is a member. So they can kind of point you in the direction of that process. I will say a caveat that, you know, not every piece of land is a good match. So there's sort of a two-way conversation happening where we're doing surveys and focus groups with farmers of color looking for land about like where and what type of land. And sometimes that doesn't overlap with the offering and sometimes it does. So there's also ways of thinking about like, you know, selling the land and using the proceeds so a farmer can buy land in the right area. So the more flexible you can be about what that looks like, the more likely to really support a Black farmer getting on land.
A similar question that's come up, Leah, is do you have any tips on groups of folks looking to get access to land, or would it be better to connect to farms already on that journey? Places to start, things to avoid in that process and or be conscious of.
So folks looking to get on land.
Yes, get access to land.
Ooh, so there's a lot of ways to get access to land. And I will try to throw up a resource in the chat because we have a bunch of different like organizations and links. But again, it really depends what you're looking for. I would say first, make sure that you know what you want to do on the land and you know how to do it. So like the first step in a journey to become a farmer, right, is actually the learning journey. Like if I wanted to be a doctor, I wouldn't ask like how do I get a hospital or something, you know, I'm going to learn. So that really helps hone in the goals. And this person who's asking may have already gone through that. I totally acknowledge it. But then there's an option to get a secure long-term lease on land trust held land. There's a number of conservation land trusts that have very low cost leases available for the right farmer. That's often a great place to start and build up your business. Certainly you can try to be matched to land through one of these land trust projects like Agrarian Trust or the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And in some cases, those, you know, those leases can be even longer and more secure. There are, I don't totally recommend, I have mixed feelings about loans, right? But there are, you know, new and beginning farmer loans and grant programs that help defray the cost of purchasing land off the market. And then the last thing I'll mention is LandLink. Most states or regions have a LandLink program that's trying to connect retiring farmers to like new and beginning farmers, so that and work out a transition plan. And that can be really good because it's a lot less investment in infrastructure if you're getting a farm that already was a farm, and keeping a farm in production rather than starting from scratch. Even though we did that, it probably wasn't the smartest thing in retrospect because it is quite a lot to do. So those are some options for you.
Okay, there are a bunch of questions coming in. One is about land trusts. Can you talk more on resources for building land trusts? New Communities Land Trust is a great example of the past, present, but what partners have been key in collaboration around the work it has taken to build those relationships?
Yeah, so something that's really foundational about New Communities Land Trust is that they really push the envelope in a few ways. One is thinking about land trust beyond just environmental conservation and really thinking about land trust as the possibility for preserving habitat for human beings. So like affordable housing and agriculture and mixed use, that was really important. And then also coming out of that, you know, this sounds a little dry and boring, but coming up with these legal structures to kind of take our indigenous way of sharing land and make it possible in a white legal system that's very, very bent on private land ownership. So things like combining a C3, 501c3 with a 501c2, which increases your flexibility. So it's like all of these sort of gifts to us. And there's a number of, for folks who want to start their own land trust, obviously talking to an existing land trust to get their organizational documents that are specific to your state is going to be really helpful. I know Agrarian Trust has a toolkit, and I'm forgetting there's another major national community land trust organization that's so obvious in the Southeast. If someone can think of it, throw it up there. But they have these like technical assistance staff people who will walk you through the process and give you all the like lease templates you need and your 1023 templates that you need and so on. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Leah. We're also getting some questions about reparations. One is, are there any resources to get involved and work to reparations that you can think of for those of us who are land workers in a system of land that we do not own? Any thoughts on how to get our larger industrial landowners involved?
Well, I would say the leading voices on reparations nationally, as far as the get involved part, would be the Movement for Black Lives, which has a really sophisticated reparations platform and this amazing reparations toolkit that's based on international precedent, like United Nations law. And then additionally, there's a beautiful project called the Truth and Reparations Project that involves like bringing together these circles of folks to talk about harms, but not just leave it at talking and forgiving, but to really hand over resources. And that's a faith-based initiative. But those are two resources I would check out. As far as getting, and I kind of feel you, right? Like here we are, this Black and brown led farm doing a cultural respect easement to share land back to the Mohican people. And it's really easy to feel bitter, like, well, all these white people have more land and resources than us. Like, why do we have to, quote, do that? And they can just keep their land. But I think that, you know, as far as convincing people to do something, like leading by example is really, there's nothing like it. And so figuring out how to be in integrity as best we can with our own acts of reparations, rematriation, and solidarity, and then building relationships with those folks who might be more resistant in our communities and kind of showing them like, well, here's the thing I did and it didn't hurt too much. And in fact, it brought all these blessings and here's how you can do it too, I think is a good strategy.
Thanks, Leah. On that note, there is a question about how Indigenous people from the borderlands of the US and Mexico can continue to heal the relationship with Black people and honor African indigeneity. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Can you share more about your thoughts on that at all?
Definitely. I mean, I feel like I can't really speak for like Indigenous people on the borderlands because that's not my identity, but I did have a really blessed experience of living mostly in Oaxaca and Mexico, a little bit in Veracruz for 6 months in 2015, studying Indigenous agriculture and spent a lot of time in the Afrodescendiente communities. So these are like Black Mexican communities, talking about this very question about like how we heal. And what they said was that a big part of healing was actually for folks in the community to recognize their own African roots and embrace their African roots, as well as the people who are like phenotypically Black in their community who've been erased and like weren't even counted in the census. We're sort of this seen as this stain. And so that healing of folks' own relationship to Blackness, they saw as a precursor to any type of solidarity work with Black communities, you know, abroad or internationally or so forth. So I'll just share that because that is what was shared with me. But I think, I mean, I guess I can speak to, as a person, I'm a multiracial person. I'm Black and Indigenous and white, but socialized as Black. And so in my own work, trying to be in more solidarity with Turtle Island Indigenous people, I will say that like so many emotions came up for me. One, this naive belief that like our oppressions were all the same, and so we should be in it together against the colonizer. This oppression Olympics pull to try to say who's more harmed, like all of these things that really create divisions. And I think while imperfect, something that I've landed on about solidarity is that, you know, the person seeking solidarity needs to show up first. And so even if it's not fair, we shouldn't have to, or all of those excuses, like showing up and saying to our wonderful Mohican friends, like, I know that you have a pipeline struggle going on, like how can we be in solidarity on your terms? We have this land here, how do you want it used? We have these resources, like what is a good place to put them? And showing like year after year that we mean it starts to build that relationship. And then we can talk about like two-way solidarity or whatever, but I think we need to take the first step.
And on the topic of healing, there is a question about how can we prevent harm instead of having to heal it for those coming behind and beside us. This person reflected on how many of us are working in this food system, experiencing the same traumas, and we bond as we share them, but how do we build ways to prevent them from happening to each other all together?
My goodness, I wish I knew how to prevent harm. I mean, I feel like until we change racial capitalism, like how can we prevent harm? My hope is that in our own institutions that we create, which is one of the reasons it's so important to create institutions, is that we do the work not to replicate these systems of oppression, but also give each other grace. Like we've been socialized in these systems and often don't know another way. So, you know, building organizations that have strong conflict transformation practices, that have built-in time for collaboration and reflection and mentorship, that have equity pay caps, and you know, all of these best practices we know about organizations that are starting to question white supremacy. We need to make sure that we're doing that in our own institutions, and that is at least harm reduction. And then hopefully we have plans in place for when harms do happen. Not every harm that happens has to leave a scar. And so if we have ways of healing through the inevitabilities of hurting one another, you know, then those wounds don't just get like packed down and become this trauma that is cycled through generations. But fundamentally, you know, I don't think we'll ever have no harm, but it's going to take the uprooting of racial capitalism to have a less harmful society, I believe.
There are so many good questions. It's hard for me to choose which ones I think will be most resonant with everyone. One is about the Uprooting Racism program. This is from a Black farmer who is curious about what running a program is like that potentially is for an audience of white folks, for people of color.
Oh, that is a juicy question. We've had so many incarnations of how to do this work. So early on, we did create an Uprooting Racism training that was very much modeled after our BIPOC farmers training. So it was like week long, and everyone comes and lives on the farm. And there's so much to say about that. I mean, it was a beautifully impactful program when we did it, but it also caused so much harm to our predominantly Black staff, because to be there witnessing like white people for the first time realize that the Dred Scott case like denied our humanity and crying about it, like it's just a lot. It's a lot. And that work needs to happen. But then the question became like, does it need to happen in our home? Right? Does it need to happen like right right in this proximity. And we started to shift to do, to really protect our Black and Brown communities' safety and sacred space, to do this crucial uprooting racism work more on the sites of these white-led organizations. And so, you know, going out to Glenwood or going to Young Farmers, you know, conference, or, you know, going to those places to do the very similar work and very impactful work, but it not having to be like in our literally in our living rooms and our bathrooms and our kitchens, that work happening. And then, you know, pandemic kind of gave us this gift and challenge of, well, how do you do everything online? And so we're in the middle of doing many of these uprooting racism trainings online, and trying to figure out like what can be done as homework and what can be done in a discussion group and what can be done online, because nobody wants to be on Zoom for like 2 days straight. At least, well, I will say I do not want to be on Zoom for 2 days straight. So that's another creative thing. But something I noticed, and this is a little vulnerable sharing here, is that of all the work I do, teaching equity, uprooting racism to predominantly white groups is like, I cherish it, and it is the most emotionally draining work that I do. It's really hard. And being able to shift to a virtual format, which means that there's like more just like staying on track with the curriculum and a little bit less of, I don't know, the stuff that spills out the edges. Everyone on my staff has said that it's like been a huge for their mental health to be able to like have those boundaries. So I don't know what the future will bring, but it's just data. It's data right now, because I think those of us who do have some positional privilege, like I have education privilege, I have light skin privilege, you know, I kind of take on the mantle of doing some of this equity work. I don't think it's incumbent upon Black people to do it, but we do it. But trying to figure out a way to do it that doesn't also kill us in the process is really important.
Leah, along those lines, there's a question here about things that you all do at Soulfire to make sure that you're taking care of yourselves, your bodies, your spirits, your relationships with one another, given how much you all do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, you know, because I'm super colonized in many ways, we kind of do the like what gets measured gets done thing. So for many years in our organization, you know, the only goals that we set were pretty outward. It's like, we will grow this much food and build this many gardens and train this many farmers, like, you know, those typical strategic goals that you see for an organization. And then a few years ago, we started being like, oh, we should add internal goals as well. Like, you know, 90% of staff feel supported in the work, experience regular feedback sessions, say that their professional development is strong, that they have enough days off, they have enough rest, right? So we started to really like define for ourselves what is success. And that has been really important because it helps us have like, you know, a clear target. So then when we get feedback of, no, actually, I didn't take my days off, even though I had them in my contract, then we can say, okay, so maybe what we need a different strategy. Maybe we need to like have a buddy who helps remind us to take that time, or some more resources to fill in for work that feels impossible to leave behind. So that's been important structurally, because I know this is a very unpopular opinion, but I actually hate the phrase self-care. It just makes me nauseous. Like, I don't want a bubble bath. Like, I don't anything like that. Like, I really believe in like self-care being like structural justice. So making sure that our home life and our work life and all of these things support us having the space to just be human beings. And yeah, I don't want like smelling salts or something. That's not self-care to me. So anyway.
I love that answer. I feel like everyone just talks about self-care all the time. I almost don't really know what it means anymore. Along those lines, excuse me, along those lines, and hopefully this won't be too repetitive, but do you find yourself asking often the difference between what work there is to do and what work is actually yours or ours to do?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that we had the overambitious delusion, really rooted in care, that like everything that needs to be fixed in the food system is our personal responsibility. And that is a sure path to failure and burnout, and also rooted in, you know, ego or, you know, that's just not necessary. It always is community, not just community within organizations, but across. And something I'm super excited about are these coalitions. So in the Northeast, for example, we have this, what we call our ecosystem of Black farmer support. So there's Corbin Hill Food Project and the Buffalo Food Equity Network working on the market side of things. There's Farm School NYC and Soulfire Farm training up the farmers. There's Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust getting farmers on land. There's Black Farmer Fund giving farmers money, right? And so you combine all of these aspects, right? And suddenly you have an entire, I don't like pipeline, so you have an entire like stream or river, right? That helps a farmer to survive and thrive on land. But it's not that we at Soulfire Farm have to be responsible for like the capital and the land and we can do our part and make sure that we have these beautiful lines of communication open to make sure that we support one another.
And you continue to do it well. There is a question about Soulfire specifically. This farmer mentioned knowing a lot of folks who want to get involved with cooperatively, collectively, and communally farming and find themselves struggling with resolving conflict. If you have any insight on maybe not necessarily how you all work through these things at Soulfire specifically, but just some general tips for farmers who might be facing that.
Oh yeah, that's a big deal. We've definitely had our horrible years around that and realized we need systems in place before there's a whole lot of conflict or, you know, people ghosting each other or just throwing shade. You know, you have that in place. You need to practice that before that happens. And so we learn the hard way, but we have structures in place for that, both to prevent conflict and also to deal with it when it arises. So a couple examples. One is every month we have Real Talk, and Real Talk is an all-way feedback session that works sort of like speed dating. So you're paired up with each member of your team for about, 7 to 10 minutes, depending on how many people and how much time. And it's split, and you have a chance to say what's working in the relationship, what are the challenges, and any asks that you have with that person. And that's really helpful because you at least once a month you have this touch point to dispel things that otherwise could build up into a whole resentful story. And we all know how that works, where you've decided that a person, left those tools out purposely to annoy you, and on top of that they did XYZ. So there's that. And then when there are conflicts that arise that need more than that, we have a protocol called Courageous Conversations, and we practice that with scenarios every year during our opening season staff retreat. And the scenarios are just invented, but it gives people familiarity. And the way that works is essentially with the presence of a witness. The person who feels harmed or feels a grievance has a chance to say uninterrupted what happened, how it made them feel, what their asks are, and the listener has an opportunity to reflect that back, and then also to share and be heard and reflect back. And that mediator will help them come up with a resolution plan. So they're not perfect, but I will say that since we started having these thoughtful practices, it's been really helpful.
Okay, and I want to end actually a couple minutes early, but this is a good one I think to end on. So I'll just ask one more. How would you say you raise awareness beyond Soulfire about the work that you do for general citizens of the U.S. to take ownership of their support and about everything that you talk about?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think this was a little unintentional. I remember writing an article, I think it was in 2015, about our work that we were doing as alternative to incarceration. So we were really pushing up against the juvenile justice system to make sure that young folks weren't getting locked up. And we had a leadership program on the farm. And I wrote the article, and I'm embarrassed to say, I can't even remember which person was murdered by the police at this time. It might have been Mike Brown, I'm not sure. But the article hit at the same time as this highly publicized police murder. And suddenly there was all this attention, right? And we weren't planning for that. We're just a little farm, but it has been more and more of that. And so we've had to ask ourselves that question of like, what is our messaging for the general public? And like the story I told of the cow being stolen as a model for reparations, I think we've had to become skillful at our storytelling to make accessible concepts that might seem scary for the mainstream. And again, I'm not saying anyone needs to tailor their language to middle America, but that's something that we've decided to take on. And I think it has been really impactful. I don't think there would be some of these conversations happening at the national policy level about giving land back to Black farmers if there hadn't been an effort to make that palatable and obvious to the general public. And so we take our storytelling really, really seriously. We've published a lot of articles, book chapters. We do live, Instagram, Facebook live shows, publish our Love Notes newsletter, and without compromising our integrity and our message, try to capture as many people in that inspiring web of obvious truth that we can, with the idea that we're pushing the whole nation towards uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system.
Well, thank you so much, Leah. This has been a pleasure doing this Q&A with you. Your presentation was phenomenal. I'm sure right now, if we were in person, everybody would be standing up and giving you a gigantic round of applause. But I'll have to just try to do the honors. So let's break. Folks, please feel free to add anything else into the Q&A and the chat. We might have some time at a later date or a later time to double back to these topics. But we're going to take about a 10-minute break, or a break from here. And then for those of you coming to the breakouts, it'll be a 10-minute break between then and now. So once again, thank you, Leah. Really appreciate you being here with us. It's a long overdue visit to have you.
Oh, such an honor. Thanks everyone so much. And I'll see folks in the breakout at 6:45 Eastern, minus the math for wherever you are.
Bye everyone, take care.